I'm just gonna say it, there are way too many streaming services. I couldn't count the amount of times I've turned on the TV ready to watch something great before opening Netflix, switching over to HBO Max and then Hulu before shutting the whole thing down and going to bed disappointed. There is one service though that I managed to find something on every single time I open the app. You already know what it is because you clicked on the video, but yeah, it's Shudder. I absolutely love Shudder. And I am not just making this video for views. I've been a subscriber to Shudder since it launched out of closed beta back in October of 2015, and I've loved it ever since. Obviously, the catalog has grown a lot over the past 6 or so years, but overall, they've always had something for me to check out, and I really appreciate that it exists at all. So with all that being said, I dug through the service from top to bottom and picked out the 5 very best movies you should watch as soon as you subscribe. I'm gonna start out with the movie that probably put Shudder on your radar in the first place. It's called Host, and it's inarguably their biggest original of all time. Host is technically a Screen Life movie, but I hate that term more than any in the entire world, so we're just gonna go with found footage. It was filmed entirely over Zoom during quarantine, and it follows a group of friends who get together and hire a medium to conduct a seance for them. Shudder greenlit this movie earlier this year when they saw a viral video from the director Rob Savage where he took his laptop up into his attic and then cut to a jump scare from Wreck to scare the shit out of all of his friends, and it totally worked. And the most noteworthy fact about it is that from script to screen, this movie was made in just under 3 months. I gotta be honest, when I first heard about this movie, I was more than a little skeptical because when this virus became a thing, it basically started a clock for a nobody filmmaker to throw together something that's themed around the coronavirus and call it a day to try and make a quick buck. And that's exactly how we got Corona Zombies, a Frankenstein's monster of a movie that was actually constructed from 2 other movies called Hell of the Living Dead and Zombies vs. Strippers. But when I fired up Host for the first time, I knew within 10 minutes that it was really something special. You guys know I'm a huge fan of the Blair Witch Project because of how real it feels thanks to the chemistry between the main actors, and that's exactly why I love Host, thanks to the fact that all of the actors in this movie are really close friends in real life. It gets even better when you learn that all of these actors were so into making this movie that they let Savage train them in making and performing their own practical effects at home, and they look awesome. It's also absolutely packed with references to other horror movies that are both subtle and in your face, but none of them get in the way, which is exactly how I like that stuff. The absolute best thing about this movie is that it never once uses that shitty digital glitch effect that other found footage movies use to hide cuts, and while it does have a couple jump scares, they're really only used for comedic effect. The fact that the team behind it also went out of their way to license the Zoom name makes it feel so much more authentic, and it also helps you forget you're watching a movie. This is the rare case where I would suggest using your iPad or your iPhone with headphones to check this movie out because it makes it feel that much more real. It also can't be overstated how important it is that this movie does not overstay its welcome at all. It only clocks in at 56 minutes and it's all killer, no filler. Now, I don't have anything against longer movies, but I watch a ton of them, especially in the horror genre, that pad themselves out with unnecessary filler just so they can hit that 90-minute runtime. It is so obvious when filmmakers are using these techniques to hit an arbitrary number, and it always results in a weaker movie overall. Savage co-wrote Host with his friends Jed Shepard and Gemma Hurley, and the success of it is already paying off big time. Not only are they working on a movie with Sam Raimi, but they also signed a 3-picture deal with Blumhouse, and they're also working on a movie that they're describing as The Conjuring set in a prison. So yeah, they're gonna be pretty busy over the next few years. After you check out the movie, make sure you listen to episode 94 of my podcast Fear Frequency, where I talked to Rob and Jed about making a movie in 3 weeks. It was a ton of fun. The second movie on my list is 2018's The Headhunter, which is directed by Jordan Downey. Before we ever knew we were getting a Witcher show on Netflix, everyone called this the Witcher movie we never knew we wanted, and that title still holds up today. It follows a Viking bounty hunter named Father who heads out into the wilderness to kill monsters, get paid by the local kingdom, and hang the heads of said monsters on his wall. Of course, it helps to fill a niche that most people can't or won't, but hunting down all of these other monsters is actually training for a fight with another one that killed Father's young daughter. The reason I love this movie so much is because because it knows exactly what it wants to be, and like Host, it has virtually zero filler. The Headhunter clocks in at just 72 minutes, and even though it was made for a meager budget of $30,000, I know it would stand up to a lot of studio horror movies that are made for 10 times that amount of money. A lot of the effects and costumes in the movie are made from stuff you could get at Spirit Halloween, and knowing that, watching it a second time, I literally couldn't tell. One of the biggest gripes I've seen with this movie is that there aren't actually a lot of fight scenes in it. Like, you'll hear the horn that signifies there's a new monster to kill, and then it'll cut straight to Father coming back with the monster's head on his back. But the practical work being done on both Father's injuries and the monster's heads is just so good that it gets the message across perfectly fine. The cinematography also does so much extra legwork too. It's only 70 minutes long, but there are a ton of wide shots that linger long enough for you to take everything in and then some, and the lighting is just absolutely beautiful. It has this overcast look from the sky that they use to light most of the shots, and when it becomes nighttime, they use candles and torches to light everything, and then surround the world around Father with darkness. It looks incredible, and it kind of has the atmosphere of Resident Evil 4, specifically its very first level, and if you've ever played that game, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because that atmosphere is perfect. There's so much stuff to stream these days, but between the Headhunter and Host, it's clear that if you take away all the tricks and techniques filmmakers use to meet that 90-minute runtime, it ultimately results in a better movie. Just make the movie that your story needs it to be. Don't do anything else. I promise you people will like them more for that. Third on the list is Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon. Now this one is not a Shudder original, mainly because it came out about 10 years before the service was a thing, but if it did come out today, they would have bought it up immediately. The best way to describe this movie is that it's a mockumentary about a supernatural serial killer who exists in the same world as the slashers we grew up with, like Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger. The story follows a journalist named Taylor who decides to make a documentary about an up-and-coming slasher villain named Leslie Vernon alongside her friends Doug and Todd. At first, you're led to believe that Leslie is a local boy who was thought to have been killed after he murdered his entire family, but this movie has a ton of twists and turns that are all great and stop the mockumentary gimmick from being the only thing it leans on. Even though the budget's pretty low, the cast is absolutely stacked with horror royalty like the late great Scott Wilson, who plays Eugene, Leslie's mentor, and Robert Englund, who plays Doc Halloran, the Loomis to Leslie's Michael. And these aren't one-off bit parts either. When Robert Englund shows up, he sticks around to the end of the movie, and I thought that was awesome. My favorite and arguably the most clever thing about Behind the Mask is that it shows us how much work the killer puts into getting a place ready to be the setting of a slasher movie before the victims even get there. Leslie does stuff like screwing with the power or messing with the weapons that are hidden around so that the teens can't use them, and the documentary aspect of how it's shot makes it all feel so much smarter than me explaining it to you probably does. It also shows us how slashers pick their victims, and it makes fun of tropes like the final girl going to the library to learn the killer's backstory, or her friends hiding in the closet like idiots. But, and this is super important, it's never done in a way that feels mean-spirited or like the writer feels like he's better or smarter than these movies for pointing out their cliches. The thing that really makes this movie a classic though is that when Leslie goes into slasher mode, for lack of a better term, it switches from the documentary film style to a normal movie film style, if that makes sense, and those scenes are shot and directed super well. And just like Host, it's absolutely full of references to the best horror movies of the 70s and 80s. Just off the top of my head, there's a cameo from Zelda Rubinstein of Poltergeist fame, there's some shots of a few of the houses from Halloween, you see Nancy's house from A Nightmare on Elm Street, there's a whole bunch more. The coolest Easter egg of all though is the character Eugene, who's actually Billy from Black Christmas, and I mean the good one, not whatever that pile we got last year was. If you pay attention, he has a couple lines about pioneering the business of fear, but not being recognized for it at the same level of some of his competitors. That of course is because Black Christmas came out in 1974 and Halloween in 1978, but Halloween is the movie that's considered to have started the slasher genre. But if you've watched this channel for a while, you definitely already knew that. I was only 13 when it came out, so I actually saw it for the first time when it hit Shudder back in 2015, but ever since then I watch it every few months whenever I need an injection of Halloween spirit. Before we get into the next movie, I have something really cool to show you guys. If you're into Halloween and fall atmosphere in your horror movies, which if you click this video, you probably are, you're going to love this exclusive clip from the movie They Live Inside Us, which is the new feature from my friend Michael Boliff. You've probably seen his anthology movie The Witching Season, which is available for free here on YouTube, and this feature is actually expanded from one of the shorts in that movie. The story follows a writer named Jake who decides to take his daughter and spend Halloween night in a notoriously haunted house to try and get some inspiration for his new book. As I'm sure you've guessed, things go wrong pretty damn quick. Like one of my favorite movies of all time, Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers, it's shot entirely in Utah during the fall, and the atmosphere in this movie, you guys, it is absolutely incredible. You know what? I'm actually just gonna let it speak for itself. Let's roll the clip. As much as I did, you'll be really excited to hear that you don't have to wait long at all to see the final movie, because it comes out on October 6th. You can rent it on Apple, Amazon Prime, YouTube, Google Play, the Microsoft Store, basically anywhere you can watch VOD movies, you'll be able to rent this movie. And you bet your ass I'll be watching it at midnight, literally as soon as it drops. And of course, big shout out to Michael for sending over the clip, because I've been a fan of his work for a very long time, and I've been waiting for this movie for years, so I am super excited to see it. Alright, let's get back to the video. The second to last movie on my list is last year's hidden Halloween gem, Haunt. This one is both written and directed by Scott Beck and Brian Woods of A Quiet Place fame, and even though this one came out after that movie, it actually was done and ready to go since around 2017. What can I say about Haunt other than the fact that it'll definitely find a permanent spot on your annual Halloween watch list, thanks to the fact that it was actually filmed during fall in a place where the leaves change color. Isn't that crazy? I can't tell you how many movies make the cheap claim that they're set on Halloween, despite the fact that they're shot or take place in Los Angeles, California, and or its surrounding hellscape areas. I mean, John Carpenter got it all the way back in 1978, and all he had to do was paint some watermelons orange and carry around a bag of dead leaves. No one else puts in that effort these days. Anyway, if you couldn't already tell, atmosphere goes a long way in this movie about a group of friends who decide to check out a haunted house after getting drunk at a party on Halloween night, only to find out that the haunted house actually wants to hurt them. What it lacks in a deep story, it makes up for with an impeccably designed haunt and antagonists who have genuinely creepy masks that are all different from each other. It also gets bonus points for me for having its main cast dress up in authentic feeling Halloween costumes for the party they go to before heading to the haunt. The haunt itself is broken up into a bunch of different rooms that have their own lighting and atmosphere, and they all look amazing to the point where I wouldn't go as far as to call any of them okay. They're all excellent. The kills are also top notch, with the first one in particular switching the tone from "are these people trying to kill us" to "these people are going to fucking kill us" perfectly. That hard left feels earned too, because from the very beginning, this haunt is set up as an extreme one, so when the characters have to hand over their phone and sign a waiver, it doesn't feel like a setup. Film Twitter has a hate boner for this movie, and for some of you, that's going to be the only endorsement you need, but I really don't understand it. The atmosphere, the production, and costume design, they all do so much heavy lifting that the relatively simple plot never manages to drag the movie back, and most importantly, it's fun to watch. So if you're the type of person who actually enjoys watching movies instead of picking them apart, and you need something to check out as October approaches, you cannot go wrong with Haunt. Last but 100% not least is one of my all-time favorite movies ever, Hell House LLC, which came out in 2015 after writer-director Stephen Cognetti spent around 4 years making it. It's a found footage movie about a group of friends who get together and run a haunted house company called, you guessed it, Hell House LLC. For this year's attraction, they've chosen the abandoned Abaddon Hotel in Rockland County, New York, and the plot follows them getting it ready to be a fully functional haunted house all the way up until the opening night, where 15 people mysteriously die. I know most people either love or hate found footage movies with no room in between, but this one is just so good that I think it'll convert even the hardest core of hardcore haters. It's really because the idea of a group of friends getting together and filming themselves getting a haunted house ready for the Halloween season makes sense, and it's super original, and there are very few jump scares to speak of. It's also kind of nitpick proof in the sense that the main characters have a reason to stay there because they sunk so much money into this place, and a lot of the scary stuff that happens throughout the first and second act of the movie can be chalked up to character traits or the fact that this hotel that they're staying in is really an urban legend of an abandoned building. And I'm going to warn you right away that when you go and search for this movie, you're also going to find 2 sequels. Both of them are Shudder originals, and unless you love the lore and everything about the first movie like I do, I would just recommend staying away from them. They were each made in the span of a year, and not only is there a huge budget drop-off, there's also a huge quality drop-off from the first movie. And they both commit the mortal sin of stretching their runtime with dumb interview segments and crappy subplots. Thankfully, Hell House LLC does more than enough to stand on its own, and it doesn't end on a cliffhanger. So it's one of those rare movies where the dumb sequels that totally screw everything up don't actually affect the first movie. And that wraps up my list of the 5 best movies you can find on Shudder as soon as you subscribe. Let me know what you think of my picks down in the comments below, and if you have any suggestions of your own, make sure you leave them. I love talking about horror movies and I answer every single comment. And finally, if you're new here, I'd really appreciate a subscription and make sure you set your notifications to all when you do so. Anyway guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne and I'll see you in the next one. Shape up.